Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. We are reissuing the Revelation series that was taught by Rabbi Jim Pickens here at Beth Yeshua over the course of the last 2 years or so. We feel these messages are especially relevant in these tumultuous times, and we hope and pray that Adonai uses them to strengthen you and to encourage you. If you are currently a supporter of this ministry, we would like to say thank you. We appreciate your partnership with us as we all labor together in the work of the gospel of Yeshua in the kingdom here on earth. If you would like to support us, you will find a link below in the video description. Once again, we hope that this is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, you will find an email address. If you have any dialogue or discussion, you'll find an email address in the video description below. Please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And now I will give you the Revelation series with Rabbi Jim Pickens. Shalom.
Okay, tonight we're going to do Zechariah Chapter 11. This Zechariah Chapter 11 is an overview, really, of the end of the age, and it begins with a mention of the war between Israel and the surrounding hostile nations and takes us through the false Messiah. It's the last of the really complex chapters of Zechariah, but it's fascinating. Zechariah chapters 12, 13, and 14 are relatively straightforward. This chapter is very interesting in that there are insights here that I think none of the other prophets have given, particularly of the time that Yeshua was on the earth during his first ministry. The first 3 verses of chapter 11 that we're going to start with relate back to the second half of chapter 10 that we did last week. These first 3 verses are really a lament about the powers whose doom have been pronounced in the second half of chapter 10. It's lamenting these powers whose doom have been pronounced. And these powers were done in the imagery of Assyria and Egypt. And there's a comment in the Stone Edition Tanakh that these 3 verses metaphorically portray the downfall of mighty nations. They're a picture of the downfall of mighty nations and the subordinates of the mighty nations, particularly those that oppressed Israel. So let's begin with Zechariah 11, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Open your doors, Lebanon, so that fire can consume your cedars. Wail, Cypress, because the cedar has fallen. Those splendid trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, because the thick forest has been felled. Listen to the wail of the shepherds, because their glory is spoiled. Listen to the roaring of the young lions, because Jordan's thickets are plundered." That's really busy, and it is really full of metaphors. These first 3 verses are a lament, as mentioned earlier, in figurative language. So it's just kind of a little difficult to interpret. The cedars here represent people holding themselves as lofty, as powerful, that they should be bowed down to because of who they are. That's what these cedars are really representing. Let's go to Isaiah. Chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "Yes, Adonai Tzava'ot has a day in store for all who are proud and lofty, for all who are lifted high to be humiliated, for all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up are all the oaks of the Bashan, for all the high mountains, for all the hills that are lifted up, for every high tower, for every fortified wall, for every Tarshish ship, for every luxury vessel. The pride of man will be bowed down, the arrogance of man will be humiliated, and when that day comes, Adonai alone will be exalted." Now we're getting ready to look at the end of the age. So it's talking about the taking down of everything that is elevating itself to be either a replacement for Adonai or to be higher than him or in some form. Look at that verse 13 in particular. It says, the cedar here is used as a symbol for pride and arrogance, and that's what it's really representing for us back in Zechariah Chapter 11 and verse 1. So this cedar is an apt symbol for alien powers which reckon themselves to be independent of God, to be above Adonai. Now, with that in mind, let's go to Ezekiel 31, verses 1 through 3. On the first day of the 3rd month of the 11th year, the word of Adonai came to me. Human beings, say to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his hordes, whom are you like in your greatness? Like Asher, a cedar in the Lebanon? It had beautiful branches, dense foliage, its tall crown surrounded by leafy boughs. Leafy boughs. Here's another passage, different prophet, that ties Assyria and Egypt together, and the cedars again used to describe them. Them being alien powers, alien to Israel, alien with their arrogance. And I think this looks ahead to the Muslim Arab states of today that surround Israel. Zechariah 11:1 through 3 again, please. Open your doors, Lebanon, so that fire can consume your cedars. Wail, Cypress, because the cedar is fallen, those splendid trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, because the thick forest has been felled. Listen to the wail of the shepherds, because their glory is spoiled. And that last line is really interesting because that changes the subject to Israel. Listen to the roaring of young lions, because the Jordan's thickets are plundered. See, before that, we're looking at lands that could be controlled today, are controlled today by the Arabs, by the Muslim Arabs. But that last line there of verse 3, listen to the roaring of young lions, because the Jordan's thickets are plundered. So we're talking about the end of the age when Israel gets plundered and when the surrounding area also gets plundered. That first verse here in Zechariah 11 describes the destruction of these powers. Notice that the cedars here are in plural, so that fire can consume your cedars. Verse 2 then introduces the cypress tree. Some English translations will have a fir tree, but the Tanakhs, the Hebrew Old Testaments, all translate this as cypress. The cypress in Scripture has been associated with the cedar, apparently a peer of the cedar when they're used like this, but never its equal. Never its equal. It's close to it, but not quite. Here it appears as the chief mourner of the cedar, representing perhaps allies of these arrogant powers. Then the oaks of Bashan are introduced. Bashan is an actual area. We've talked about this a little earlier. It's located north and east of the Sea of Galilee. It's the most of the southern part of modern Syria, right up till we get to the border of Israel. These oaks come forth and mourn also because the loftiest of the forest has come down. Metaphors. We're just dealing with metaphors through this whole verse. If the cedars here are representing the arrogant Muslim countries that are pushing against the modern state of Israel today, who would the cypress and oaks be representing for us? That's our question. How about they're representing peoples of various levels that might be left after these cedars are decimated, because this is talking about a wiping out of the leadership of this whole Arab Muslim faction. The various arrogant Muslim powers are cut down. Who is left after they're wiped out? Why mourn? Well, the basis of their existence will have just been wiped out. basis of those that are left were just going to be wiped out because those that were running the show basically aren't here anymore. And their question then is, where do we turn to? That's going to be the people that are left. Where do we turn to? Those following the God of Israel, as we looked at a second ago, haven't fared that well for us either, as explained to us in verse 3. I'll read it again, last sentence. Listen to the roaring of young lions, because the Jordan's thickets are plundered. The shepherds and the flock are introduced to here. More metaphors. Shepherds and the flock are introduced here. The flock being Israel, the shepherds being those leading that flock, which is Israel, among whom are the young lions that are roaring. The Jordan, as in the Jordan rivers, thickets are plundered, and that's talking about the land of Israel, the modern state where the flock Israel is living, and it being seriously whacked at the end of the age. We're looking at the prophetic here. Our verse 3 tells us that two things will come out of this: the wail of the shepherds, those that have been leading Israel, crying out, picture wailing in anguish, and two, the roaring of the young lions. Who are these young lions? Well, looking ahead, what we're being shown here, we're really pointing towards something in this that is pointing towards a climax. Understand that those who will be left after Jordan's thickets are plundered, after Israel is whacked, will be the young lions, and we will see in two chapters ahead, that they will amount to about 1/3 of Israel. 1/3 of Israel being left, and that they are going to roar, that 1/3 that's left. This all pointing to the coming end of the age, where Adonai's protective hand is lifted from modern Israel because of their conduct before him. That's important for us to keep in mind and understand. All of this is going down against Israel because his protective hand is lifted away from modern Israel, his protection lifted away from them because of their conduct before him. Let's go to Jeremiah 25:32, please. Thus says Adonai Tzevaot, disaster is spreading from nation to nation. A mighty tempest is being unleashed from the furthest ends of the earth. On that day, those killed by Adonai will be strewn from one end of the earth to the other. They will not be mourned or gathered or buried, but will lie on the ground like dung. Verse 34, wail, shepherds, cry, wallow in the dust, you lords of the flock, for the days of your slaughter have come. I will break you in pieces, and like a prized vase you will fall. Next. The shepherds have no way to flee, the lords of the flock no way to escape. Hear the cry of the shepherds, the wails of the lords of the flock. For Adonai is destroying their pasture being Israel. The peaceful grazing grounds are silenced because of Adonai's fierce anger. That again is talking about an Israel that had been under his hand, those peaceful grazing grounds. Verse 38, like a lion, not like the young lions, but a different kind of a thing, like a lion he has abandoned his lair. For their land has become desolate because of the oppressor's fierce sword and because of Adonai's fierce anger. Adonai abandoning his lair is just backing away from Israel and letting things happen. Letting things happen. Lot more metaphors here. Notice that like a lion, Adonai will abandon his lair, which will be Israel. The place where he has chosen to dwell amongst his people, he's going to back away from. This process may have already started as we notice some of the things that have been unfolding between Israel and Gaza now. Things are going on here that normally should not be able to take place on a continuing basis. Let's have Zechariah 11:3 just one more time. Listen to the wail of the shepherds because their glory is spoiled. See, if Adonai's backed away, the glory is also gone. Listen to the roaring of young lions, because the Jordan's thickets are plundered. I think that's talking about Israel as a nation being plundered by the Arab nations surrounding them in a coming event that we'll be looking at, I believe, a little bit later. The tremendous allegory here of the coming time of the end. Now, what we're going to do from this point on is move into a little bit more of a narrower focus. From verse 14 through the balance of the chapter, what's mostly being talked about are the shepherds. The shepherds, those that are leading Israel. From here on, we'll be focusing on those leaders, referred to as shepherds. And again, these are complex verses to interpret. We can glean from these, I think, only by approaching them from a Messianic point of view, because Messiah Yeshua is our ultimate shepherd. He is the one that all this shepherds and shepherding and everything ultimately points to. That being the case, there's information in the New Testament that sheds some light on these verses as well. It's often assumed that if a country were to find a ruler, a shepherd, that was totally dedicated to the good of his people, who would rid the land of injustice and encourage all of the things that make harmony, peace, and happiness, this would be a shepherd/leader that would prevail. That's kind of the concept. If somebody like that pops up, why not everybody jump on? We can interject Yeshua Messiah into this role if we would. But the insight given our prophet Zechariah here is that such a ruler appearing is not only not going to be welcomed by the powers that be, think about that, such a ruler of this appearing is not going to be welcomed by the powers that are in place already, and that he will be positively hated and rejected by them. Because he's going to come in and everybody's going to flock to him, and they're going to be out of a job. This is prophetic of Yeshua's first ministry. From here on, in Zechariah chapter 11, we have detailed imagery of a shepherd and a flock. The flock is no doubt Israel. The primary shepherd is no doubt Adonai as Messiah Yeshua. And this is focusing on one people and one land. There are three clear divisions in what is being given us that we're going to look at, and don't put anything on the screen quite yet. The first division is in verses 4 through 6, and it indicates that Adonai totally understands what is coming and tells us what his reaction is going to be. That's the first division that we're going to look at. Adonai totally understands what's coming and tells us what his reaction to this is going to be. Then the second division is in verses 7 through 14, where the good shepherd is rejected. And finally, in a third division, verses 15 through 17, I'm assuming, because I just wrote 7 here. The good shepherd is rejected. So finally, in this third division, it propels us into our future, where there is a worthless shepherd that appears in the place of the good shepherd. This prophesies the false Messiah that's coming. So let's begin to walk our way through this first division that we want to look at, Zechariah 11, 4 through 6. Adonai my God says this, shepherd the flock for slaughter. Ooh. Their buyers kill them and go unpunished, while those who sell them say, Baruch Adonai, now I'm rich. Even their own shepherds show them no pity. I will no longer show pity to the inhabitants of the land, says Adonai. No, I will hand every one of them over to the power of a neighbor and to the power of his king, the neighbor's king. They will crush the land, and I won't rescue them from their power. Wow. Well, the words in verse 4 are a little unusual in the writing of a prophet. It begins with the term, Adonai my God says. That's basically found really only in Psalms and in prayers, and when it's used elsewhere in Scripture, it's generally to distinguish the speaker from the hearers, the speaker from those that are listening to this. The primary listener to this is Zechariah, who wrote this down, Zechariah the prophet. And here the prophet is not actually being commanded to perform any of the acts that are going to be listed. They're given, though, as allegory, which is a method of teaching in these passages. And that the teaching really has a divine sanction is shown to us here. The first instruction is to pasture the sheep who are destined for slaughter, that is, to shepherd them as a flock. Bring them together in one spot. Shepherding them as a flock is pasturing them. This is prophetic so that we can put this into a perspective. So bringing this forward, modern Israel was largely formed by those claiming to be secular. Modern Israel is the pasture that they have been gathered into, if you will. And modern Israel is largely formed by those claiming to be secular, no longer claiming association with Adonai. I estimate that 80% of the Jews in Israel still claim to be secular, rejecting God, and the rejection of Messiah Yeshua is even higher, well up in the 90th percentile. For these, there is no salvation. If you reject Yeshua, there's no way to come into a new relationship with God. These are, in a word, those that are destined for slaughter. These are those currently pastured in the land. They are the flock being shepherded for slaughter. The Hebrew word for slaughter here is a very common word used in many places, but the phrase here, the way it's put together, is found only one other place in Scripture. Jeremiah 12:3, please. It says, "But Adonai, you know me," this is Jeremiah speaking, "and you see me. You test my devotion to you." And then he issues a request to Adonai. Drag them, that's those that he has been giving prophecy to, drag them away like sheep to be slaughtered and set them apart for the day of slaughter. That's the same word slaughter that's used here in Zechariah 11 being used in this instance. Jeremiah is asking here for justice to be imposed on those that threatened him with slaughter for his prophecies. Adonai, shepherd them like sheep to be slaughtered. These have a condition much like the ones in Zechariah 11:4. Now back to Zechariah 11:4 through 6, please. Adonai my God says, "Shepherd the flock for slaughter. Their buyers kill them and go unpunished, while those who sell them say, Baruch Adonai, now I'm rich. Even their own shepherds show them no pity." Wow. That's fascinating. The focus here, I believe, modern Israel. And that's what these passages are pointing to. Those shepherding are those with leadership positions who are going to land the flock, Israel, in a condition of slaughter, and they're going to be doing it by not following Adonai, by, in fact, taking on a secular attitude instead of following what Adonai says you should be doing if you're going to be my people. Understand that we're going to find out in a couple more chapters that this slaughter is going to be enormous. Enormous. The terms buyers and sellers here that we just looked at is also allegorical. The term buyers is pointing towards those who will invade to take over and destroy. They were buying, they're grabbing, they're getting a hold of the people that they want to do in. And the sellers are those who are in there right now, I believe, currently mismanaging Israel's government to the point where when this happens, they think they're doing the greatest of jobs, even though they're secular and they're following secular stuff. They're saying things like, look at how rich we are. Look at how rich we are. Look at how well off we are. And Adonai says he's going to let this happen. Adonai says he's going to let this happen. He'll hand them, that is Israel, over because of theirs, that's Israel's relationship with himself. And that what that relationship with himself has deteriorated into. Correction will be made after Israel, in the form of those young lions, wake up and call out to him. There was a time between the Old Testament and the New Testament that there was a type and foreshadow of this coming period laid out for us. It's called the Maccabean period, when the empires of the Seleucids, Syria, and the Ptolemies, Egypt, were very involved in the destiny of Israel. And we went through this in great detail back in study number 14, so we're not going to spend a lot of time here with this now. The Seleucid Greek Empire came into control of Israel/Judah and wanted to destroy it through Hellenization. Now, they wanted to pull or shove Judah away from Adonai, their God, into a relationship with the Greek gods. And they took over the office of high priest and they sold it to the highest bidder. Now you know that this guy that they sold it to was going to really be interested in the fellow Jews and right, going to have them in his heart. The invaders wanted to destroy the Jews' heritage, Hellenize them, and in this high bidder high priest they had a willing accomplice. A shepherd who had no pity on his people or in the relationship of his people to their God, to their Creator. Again, this is a type and foreshadow of what Luke 11:4-6 is pointing to at the end of the age. Even though this role given to shepherds, leaders of Israel, they appear through the prophecy that they're going to be careless and unworthy of their office. This, though, has a place in the divine plan. When this day arrives, Adonai, God, will no longer spare the inhabitants of the land. Israel will be delivered into the power of their neighbors and to the power of these neighbors' leaders. What will occur here to Israel seems then to spread across the earth, and in very obscure language seems to indicate anarchy spreading across the earth as well. The goal of these neighbors will be the destruction of Israel. And God will let them take over to a point. He'll let them take over to a point. God is going to let this happen. He's going to back away, remove his restraint. Where can we find a reference to something like this going on? Well, let's go to 2 Thessalonians Chapter 2, verses 5-7. This is the Apostle Paul speaking writing a letter to them, and he's saying, "Don't you remember that when I was still with you, I used to tell you these things?" Paul has given them all these words. "And now you know what is restraining, so that he may be revealed in his own time. For already the separating from Torah is at work secretly, but it will be secretly only until he who is restraining it is out of the way." Yeah, they're drifting away from Torah. They're getting more and more secular. That's what got them in trouble every time they got kicked out of the land. And basically, this is going to be done very quietly and so forth, but only until he who is restraining what's coming in gets out of the way. This is an unusual statement. The Apostle Paul speaking here, talking about the prophetic becoming obvious one day. He's talking about the prophetic becoming obvious someday as Adonai removes his restraint and lets things happen. And he's talking about a particular time that's coming. Listen, I'm going to give you a direct translation from the interlinear. This is word for word from the Greek text. Do not you remember when I was still with you? I told you this, and you know what is restraining him, Adonai, so that he may be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who is now restraining, it will do so until he is out of the way. It will do so until he is out of the way. Who is it? The general interpretation is that the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is the restraining force. It's the restraining force in the world. It always has been and is at this particular point in time that Paul's writing. But there's going to be a time that that restraining force will be removed, and then the false Messiah will be loosed. Will be loosed. Now, we need to think about this. Each man of Israel will be delivered into the power of his neighbors. We're talking each individual. We're not talking about the surrounding nations now. We're talking about in Israel. Each man of Israel will be delivered into the power of his neighbors. Who are his neighbors? The Arabs that are living in Israel, many of whom are citizens of Israel. And they will be delivered into the power of these neighbors. Just that fact that this includes these Arab neighbors living in Israel adds the dimension to this of anarchy. Anarchy is going to be flowing through Israel as well as exterior attacks coming against them. The withdrawing of the restraint that holds lawlessness in check would lead to anarchy. It is God who frankly holds the world in check, so there's at least a veneer of civilization, and God says he's going to lift his restraint. He's going to lift his restraint. He's not going to prevent Israel from going under the power of their neighbors, not just those that are there in anarchy, but also their neighbors, the Muslim Arab world. Interesting concept. Zechariah Chapter 11, verses 7 and 8, please. So that's Adonai speaking, so I shepherded the flock for slaughter. God set them up for slaughter. Truly the most miserable of the sheep. And I took 2 staffs for myself. I called one Noam, pleasantness. The other I called Havalim, bound together. And I shepherded the flock. In a single month I got rid of 3 shepherds because I grew impatient with them, and besides, they detested me. These are leaders, shepherds of Israel that were leading Israel, and God got rid of them. Why? Because they detested him. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to this business of God being detested by these shepherds. The parable continues here. A miserable flock, this Israel. So God, in dealing with them, creates 2 staffs. 2 symbols is what these staffs are. The first one, Noam, represents the duties and obligations of the leader, the shepherd. The duties and obligations of the leader, the shepherd, to his flock. And these duties are a concern for their welfare, a devotion to their best interests, and this would exist as long as the subject remained loyal to him. That's what's supposed to be. The second staff is called bound together. Havalim. Remember, these are symbols. And it is the shepherd's duty to bind the sheep together into a whole. God says, I shepherded the flock for slaughter, prophetic of what's coming. Needed ultimately in order to ultimately bring correction. It goes on to say he got rid of 3 shepherds in a single month. This little clause, hang on to this thought here, this little clause is virtually the most widely translated verse in the Bible. This little clause is virtually the most widely translated verse in the Bible because everyone has a different idea as to who these 3 verses, shepherds, are. But, and think about this, but there's no chance here of recognizing any historical situation that this particular verse pertains to. There's nothing in history that's laid out that we can add this to. It has to be something in the future. It has to be something in the future. It certainly hasn't happened in the past. That's obvious. People have built up all kinds of theories about when this would have been, but the truth is nobody really knows what this is a reference to. What likely is going to happen here is the shepherd, God, is going to run out of patience. He's going to run out of patience. He's going to come to the end of his endurance in dealing with those people, Israel. And this indicates that when he does this, when he reaches this point, an abandonment by him of them to judgment. To judgment. That's what he's doing. He's turning them over to judgment when he raises his hand. He abandons the sheep, Israel, to judgment. Let's go for a look in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. This is to give you an idea what God is putting up with and what he's unhappy about. Stop bringing worthless grain offerings. They're like disgusting incense to me. Rosh Hodesh, Shabbat, calling convocation. Stop doing that because you're not doing it for the real purpose. Stop doing this. I can't stand evil together with your assemblies. If you're going to do all this evil stuff, quit coming before me. Verse 14, everything in me hates your Rosh Chodesh and your festivals. They are a burden to me. I am tired of putting up with them. This gives an idea of the frustration of God. What's going to cause the end of his endurance. He's just saying here, I'm tired of putting up with them. Besides that, they detested me. They detested me. The sheep had a correspondent feeling towards the shepherd God that created the frustration on the part of the shepherd God and the end of his endurance. It's interesting that this Hebrew verb translated detested at the end of Zechariah 11:8. Let's go there. In a single month, I got rid of 3 shepherds because I grew impatient with them, and besides, they detested me. At the end of this verse, this occurs only here in the Old Testament. This is the only place that it occurs. It's interesting that this Hebrew verb translated detested at the end of Zechariah 11:8 occurs only here in all of Tanakh. It expresses a loathing of Adonai God, a loathing like darkness resented and loathed the light. Remember the account of when Yeshua healed the man who was not only blind, but a deaf mute, and he cast out an evil spirit, and those shepherding the flock when he arrived that were bringing accusations accused him of doing this by the power of Beelzebub. Well, that had the same effect on Adonai, on Yeshua, as this is having on Adonai God. They detested him. It was shown in this. And he reached the point there that he had it with them. From that point on, Yeshua only spoke to the general crowds in parables. He would only speak directly to his own disciples. This whole business that we just looked at about him being accused of using the power of Beelzebub really aggravated Messiah Yeshua, and from then on to the end of his ministry, he would only speak to the crowds in parables. There was a change there. Exasperation by Yeshua with Judah. It's almost like a type and foreshadow had been laid out by Yeshua. It could be that what we're looking at here at the end of the age is that same kind of change. He reaches a point where he's not going to put up with them anymore. Yeshua had reached the end of his endurance. He would speak to them, but he wouldn't speak to them directly as before. He withdrew from him, and God is going to withdraw one day coming from Israel. He's going to cease shepherding Israel, which was what Yeshua in essence quit doing and shepherded only his direct people that were following him. It's prophesied that this is going to happen. Zechariah 11, 9 through 11, please. That's God. I said, I'm not going to shepherd you. Well, whichever one is going to die, let it die. Whichever one is going to be destroyed, let it be destroyed. And the rest can all devour each other. God's kind of had it. Verse 10, I took my staff, Noam, and snapped it in two, in order to break my covenant which I made with all peoples. On that day when it was broken, the most miserable of the sheep who paid attention to me knew that this was indeed a message from Adonai. Interesting group of words. The best indication of what verse 9 is about is the withholding of his leadership, being a shepherd. God abandons his people to live with the consequences of the rejection of him. Death, destruction. Simply put, things will take their course. The shepherd will not interfere, and the sheep/Israel cannot survive on their own. That's the point that this is all going to fester up and come to. Now the staff called Noam, pleasantness or favor or graciousness, will be broken, symbolizing the revoking of a conditional covenant. It's symbolizing the revoking of a conditional covenant, a covenant which God made, which required a response from the human side. That's what a conditional covenant is. I'll do this if you do that. These words are usually understood as meaning the covenant by which Israel was protected from the other nations. Here the covenant is related to the staff, which would mean that the covenant is with the people as represented by the sheep. If this does include all the nations of the earth, Israel certainly is among them when this is snapped. But I think this covenant talked about here is only with Israel. The breaking of the staff was just what the traffickers, the invaders after the sheep, will want to be done. They want this to be done. They want Israel to get so far away from God, he just says, that's it, and lets them in. They want to get rid of the shepherd. They know that the shepherding of Israel is the work of Adonai, Israel's God. This, of course, is referring to the time of Yeshua. As we looked at verse 9, it seemed to indicate, 9 and 10 actually, what this was all about. This shepherding by their God would be what would be the coming and return of Yeshua. But I'm going to ask you a question about something. What we have is this statement in verse 11. On that day when it was broken, the most miserable of sheep who paid attention to me knew that this was indeed a message from Adonai. This is a message from Adonai. Well, what about this? Let's go all the way back to Yeshua's time and start with the Torah teachers. The Torah teachers of Yeshua's time only gave an insight to what they knew. That's all they did. And if they knew something, they would most definitely give an insight to it. And if they knew, think about this, what this passage, Zechariah 11:11, pertained to, then they would have known that Yeshua was the Messiah when he stopped teaching directly and started teaching in parables. It kind of leaves us with this glimmer that, yeah, we really understood who this was. But in fact, Yeshua wasn't the Messiah they wanted. See, this is supposed to show them that he is Messiah, but he wasn't the Messiah that they wanted. Remember when Yeshua was born and the Magi came from the east following the star? They came to Jerusalem and they talked to Herod. They also consulted with the Jewish religious leaders about Messiah, and these religious leaders said, well, he's going to be born in Bethlehem, so that's where they went, and of course they found Yeshua. And they worshipped him. And Herod said, when you guys find him, come back and let me know so I can worship him too. And we know, of course, that Herod's intent was not quite that honorable. The Spirit of God spoke to the Magi and told them to go straight home, not back to Herod. And when Herod heard this, he had all of the males 2 years of age and under in the area killed. See, this was his attempt to pick off this future king. This would be born in Bethlehem. Those that were ruling the sheep, Israel, wanted to be absolutely rid of that potential new shepherd that would take over from them. Herod was among those that wanted to get rid of this shepherd, Yeshua. But there were so many hints that they were constantly given, all as he became an adult and through his ministry. When he was doing the Messianic miracles, what did people say? Never has anything like this ever been seen before in Israel. No one had healed a leper since Torah was written and the rules of the ritual for cleansing a leper had been set in place. No leper cleansed had ever showed up in the temple to have this done for him. Their understanding was only Messiah could do this. And the people asked the leadership, could this be him? Could this be the Messiah? And their leadership's reaction was a moving to get rid of him, because he wasn't the Messiah that they wanted. The people were perfectly willing to accept him. They, this leadership, were the most miserable of the sheep. And here, Zechariah 11:11, interestingly, are these words. Even the most miserable of sheep knew this was indeed a message from Adonai. The sheep are really going to continue their rebellion to Adonai's wishes until he washes his hands of them. Look at the prophecy that follows this, Zechariah 11:12 and 13. I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages. If not, don't. So they weighed out my wages, 30 silver shekels, that is 12 ounces. Keep 12 ounces in mind. Concerning that princely sum which they valued me, Adonai said, throw it into the treasury. So I, that's Zechariah, took the 30 shekels and threw them into the treasury in the house of Adonai. Most logical interpretation of this one is that it is prophetic of the betrayal of Messiah. And this is the 30 pieces of silver that the religious leaders paid to Judas Iscariot, to hand over Yeshua to him. Take that to Matthew 26, please. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas of Iscariot, went to the head Kohanim and said, "What are you willing to give me if I turn Yeshua over to you?" And they counted out 30 silver coins and gave them to Judas. Let me point out something here that I don't forget it. Remember what is being said about this back in Zechariah 11:13. Zechariah said, "So I took the 30 silver shekels and threw them into the treasury of the house of Adonai." Now in Matthew, notice that it wasn't Judas who set the price. He went in and said to them, "How much is it worth to you to get your hands on this Yeshua?" And they set the price, 30 silver coins. In Zechariah 11:12, it says, "If it seems good to you, give me my wages. If not, don't." They set the price here as well. They set the price here for Yeshua as that of a slave. Do you know that? They set the price here for him as that of a slave. That's what the bad sheep leadership of Judah made Yeshua's be equivalent to, a slave, a nothing. Something that could be bought and sold as a commodity. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave in the ancient times. Shemot, Exodus, please. If an ox gores a male or female slave, its owner must give their master 12 ounces of silver, and the ox is to be stoned to death. That was the value of a slave, 12 ounces of silver, 30 shekels. Note that Zechariah 13:1, it's going to say the princely sum at which they valued me. When we get there, this is going to be pointed out as this is the princely sum at which they valued me. Then Matthew 27:3-6, please. Then Judah, who had betrayed him, Judah who had betrayed him saw that Yeshua had been condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the head Kohanim, the high priest, and the elders, saying, "I sinned in betraying an innocent man to death." "What is that to us?" they answered. "That's your problem." Hurling the pieces of silver into the sanctuary, he left. Then he went off and hanged himself. The head Kohanim, the high priest, took the silver coins and said, "It is prohibited to put this into the temple treasury because it is blood money. We can't put this in the treasury." They knew. They knew. Zechariah 11:14. Then I snapped in two my other staff, Hovalim, which means bound together, in order to break up the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. This introduces something kind of long, but let's work our way through it. The names Judah and Israel are a description of the entire people of Israel. And they were first broken apart, like this is talking about here, broken apart into the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom was expelled from Adonai's presence from the land first. Then Judah from the south was expelled next, and expelled twice. All of these expulsions because of having turned away from Adonai. The separation for both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, was reversed with the formation of the modern state of Israel. But the problem created these exiles originally is still with us. The problem that created the northern kingdom being thrown out and Judah being thrown out twice is still with us. That problem is the rejection of Adonai, particularly in the form of Messiah Yeshua, as we move forward. But the problem is that the reason they got thrown out is they rejected Adonai. They moved towards secularism. The modern state of Israel is in the process of rejecting Adonai, and so the staff, so-called Hovalim, is still snapped. It's still broken. The staff called Noam is also still broken, still snapped. the benefit of the covenant will be withheld until Jerusalem resolves its rejection of Adonai, which is laid out for us in Zechariah 11. What is laid out for us in Zechariah 11 are the steps that will force Israel to make this reversal. Make it happen. Because they're going to do it. Yeshua gave us what must happen when this reversal is finally completed. Matthew 23:37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets, you stone those who are sent to you. How often I wanted to gather your children as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you refused. Look, God is abandoning your house to you, leaving it desolate. For I tell you, from now on you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Name of Adonai. Wow. What Zechariah 11:14 is saying is this is a brotherhood thing. Israel must unite. Israel must unite and call for this. Unite in the modern state of Israel, in the capital Jerusalem, and call for this. The Messianic community has said already, blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai. That's why we're here. We're now waiting for the rest of Israel to catch up to us. What's going to take place for this to happen will be catastrophic, as laid out. Meantime, there's more going to be going on as spelled out until we reach the end of this. More being going on that's laid out in Zechariah 11. Let's go to verses 15 and 16. And I said to me, this time take the equipment of a worthless shepherd. For I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who won't bother about the ones who have been destroyed, won't seek out the young, won't heal the broken, won't feed those standing still. On the contrary, he will eat the meat of the fat ones and break their hooves into pieces. Wow. This is jumping back into what Zechariah 11 has said, but it's also jumping ahead to our future. It's jumping ahead to our future and to the false Messiah. A new shepherd is introduced. A new shepherd is introduced. A worthless shepherd. The false Messiah. He will certainly be, from God's point of view, a worthless shepherd. Many other translations will say foolish shepherd. Foolish is also a good definition of the false Messiah. Psalm 14 tells us, a fool says in his heart there is no God. Let's take this to Daniel 11:36, please. The king that we're talking about, the false Messiah, will do as he pleases. He will exalt himself and consider himself greater than any god. He will utter monstrous blasphemies against the God of gods. He will prosper only until the period of wrath is over for what has been determined to take place. He will show no respect for the gods of his ancestors, the gods his ancestors worshipped, or for the god women worship. He won't show respect for any god because he will consider himself greater than all of them. This is the worthless shepherd. The word worthless implies moral deviation. A person will despise reason and instruction, a person blind to the purposes of God. Zechariah 11:16 again, please. For I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who won't bother about the ones who have been destroyed, won't seek out the young, won't heal the broken, and won't feed those standing still. On the contrary, he will eat the meat of the fat ones and break their hooves into pieces. He's talking about the sheep. This fully describes the worthless shepherd, the false Messiah. The description is one of negligence, alternating cruelty. He won't give any assistance to those who are being destroyed. A good shepherd is defined as one who will leave 99 and go to help one. This one won't deal with the helpless or the broken. The sheep that are starving will not be fed. A loaf of bread would buy a bag of gold, as fitting in here. If we think about it, this verse is a picture of absolute greed on the part of the worthless shepherd, and that's a matter of his policy. He's in it for what's in it for him. He will consume those that are in good shape and ignore those that are not. Zechariah 11:17, please. Woe to the worthless shepherd who abandons his sheep. May a sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered and his right eye totally blinded. This is the judgment of the worthless shepherd who deserts his flock. This is the judgment of the false Messiah. Because he will be a ruler, the instrument through which he is to be punished will be war. The verse ends with language that describes his shepherd and his empire as defenseless. His right arm is the one in which he would hold his sword, his weapon, to defend himself. Now the right eye is also defined here. The shield is held in the left arm in front so as to ward off blows, so the right eye peeks around the edge of the shield. If the right eye is blind, the left eye has to peer around the edge of the shield, exposing the whole head of this false Messiah to the conditions of the battle. And if you expose his whole head, he is certainly to receive a mortal blow, rather than just peeking around the edge. Go to Daniel again, 11 verse 45. Finally, when he, that's this false Messiah, pitches the tents of his palace between the seas and the mountain of the holy glory, he will come to his end with no one to help him. This briefly describes the end of the false Messiah. The last 3 verses of Zechariah 11 speak, if ever so abstractly, to the false Messiah. Give you a thought, give you something to look for. Daniel 9 tells us that the false Messiah is going to have made a covenant with Israel. We've looked at that. That's going to last for 7 years only. Some call this a 7-year covenant. I think it is an open-ended covenant that will only last for 7 years. It is very possible that during the first half of this 7 years is going to be the time when the temple will be built in Jerusalem. It'll certainly be in existence before the false Messiah's death, because the abomination of desolation is going to occur in that temple. It's very likely that many in Israel, because they're going to see the false Messiah building this, they're going to think that the false Messiah is their good shepherd, not their worthless shepherd. They will be deceived at the beginning into believing that the one they've waited for is so long has arrived. And this covenant will make people feel that they're being defended. The religious will certainly buy into the concept that he is Messiah, since he's building them a new temple. And that will certainly make life more difficult for all of the believers that are in the land at the time. This Zechariah chapter 11 is an overview, as mentioned at the start, of the end of the age. Begins with a mention of the war between Israel and the surrounding hostile nations and takes us through the false Messiah. Next week we'll start off the last 3 chapters of Zechariah, which entails really only just one prophecy. Last 3 chapters really entail just one prophecy. And this is the point also next week when we begin that we will begin to move from just overview into more detail. It'll take us 6 lessons to get through these final 3 chapters of Zechariah. But that will complete our Old Testament preparation to understanding that we want to take to the book of Revelation. Close with that.